Hello, everybody. It is 11:30. My name is Jordan Walker. We are going to go ahead and get started with this Mid-States Corridor webinar. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's going to be about 30 minutes here. If you have questions as we go through this, we will be answering them at the end. Chances are I'll answer some of those questions, or at least I hope to. But with that being said, we are going to go ahead and get started. Okay, again, thank you for joining us this morning. Again, my name is Jordan Walker. I'm with Seaver Walker Padgett Law Firm. We are an eminent domain only law firm. We are a landowner only law firm. And I just want to get some preliminary information out of the way. Some of you might be wondering why you received this letter that we sent out. It's because, according to our research via publicly available information supplied by INDOT online, your property is within the corridor of study for the Mid-States Corridor Project. So they've determined a corridor. We'll get into exactly what that means here in a bit. They've determined a corridor for this project, and your property is within that corridor. And so we took a look at the online information. We sent out some letters, of course, inviting you to attend this webinar. And that's why you got the letter from us recently. Again, who we are eminent domain attorneys only. This is the only area of law that we practice. Our mission as a law firm in general is to help out landowners that are affected by road projects, affected by pipeline projects, affected by power line projects, any project where the land can be taken via eminent domain. So this is the only area of law we work. And again, we do not work with condemners ever. We've never worked for INDOT. We've never worked for a government entity. We've only been landowner, only helping out folks that are affected by these projects. What we're going to be talking about today, we're going to talk a little bit about the project, where we're at, what's going on, or where INDOT's at, rather, but where we are in the general phase. We're going to talk about eminent domain, what that means for you and your land, and we'll be talking about key points, things to look for when INDOT gets into the land acquisition process, which we are a bit a ways from. We are not particularly close as we sit here from land acquisition, but we do like to get out in front of these projects as much as we can. So that when INDOT does come through and starts making offers, starts talking about eminent domain, you'll be prepared, you'll know what to do, you'll know how to handle it. So the Mid-States Corridor is a new road project the INDOT wants to build, or at least they're in the preliminary stages of designing this project. It's a 54-mile road project, essentially extending from I-64 all the way up to I-69. It's divided into 5 sections that you can see there on the slide to the right. The 5th section is part of existing roads, so it's not really depicted on the map. This is obviously a 10,000-foot view of this project. Significant project, about as significant as a road project you'll see in Indiana, besides the I-69 project, which obviously was quite a big project as well. It's divided into 5 sections. Currently, what INDOT is doing is they are looking at section 2, which is in the yellow on the map there to the right, and with the idea of eventually narrowing this 1,000-foot corridor that they've determined to a route. So the way projects work in Indiana, especially new build projects like this, whether it's this project or I-69, or when they're significant large projects, and when they are building new projects, I should say, they start with a corridor, and the corridor is generally 1,000 feet wide. And these corridors are where within that corridor the road will eventually go, and a route will be chosen within the 1,000-foot corridor. Usually the route's about 300 feet. So they determined the corridor for the project, but eventually they're going to narrow that down to a route. So it's possible that as we sit right now, your property is within that 1,000-foot corridor, but eventually down the road, when INDOT decides to pick a route within that corridor, it's possible that your property will no longer be affected. We don't know that. We won't know that until INDOT does their due diligence, does their engineering, their design, all the environmental work to determine where they want to put the road. So we mailed out to the entirety of the corridor because, of course, we don't know where it's going to go. No one knows where it's going to go specifically yet. But this is where we're at in the process. We like to, again, we're ahead of everything. We like to be ahead of everything. It's good to be ahead of this because then you're prepared when and if they come in and start making offers, start talking about acquiring your land. So with regards to where we are in the grand scheme of things, as far as right-of-way, which is ROW, that's what that stands for. Right-of-way means acquiring land, as they will need to do for this project. They will need to acquire land to build it, and that may include your property. We aren't expecting right-of-way to begin until 2027 and beyond. I'll say that generally with these projects, the timelines are ambitious. They are rarely met. So even that might be ambitious for them. So we might be looking at right-of-way even beyond that. And that's, of course, assuming that funding is secured and funding stays secured. As you may or may not be aware, the biggest hurdle for any road project is funding. There are plenty of projects that people think about that INDOT wants to build or thinks about building, talks about building, doesn't end up building them. With this, and the large reason for that is that funding comes and goes, depending on a number of factors. So, as we sit right now, the expectation is that right-of-way is going to begin in 2027. We don't know that for a fact. We'll see how things play out here in the future. And there are no timelines for the remainder of the sections, section 3, 4, 5, as you go north towards I-69. So that's where we're at. That's what's going on. And with that being said, I want to talk about eminent domain because I've already touched on it. I've already mentioned it a couple times. It's our area of law. Eminent domain is the power of the government to acquire private land and put it to a public use, a public purpose. It is most traditionally exercised for road projects. INDOT wants to build a road. They need to get the land. Ultimately, a landowner can't stop the project just by refusing to sell their land to the government. Eventually, eventually the state, in this case INDOT, has the power to take you to eminent domain, file a lawsuit against you to acquire your land through the court system. So basically, you can't just say no forever and say, I don't want this, I don't want it to happen, I don't want them to take my land. Eventually, they will have the power to do that. So while they do have the power to acquire your land and put it to a public use, they still have to pay for it. And you as a landowner are entitled to just compensation for the acquisition of your property, which means you have the ability, if you choose, to take your case all the way through condemnation, all the way through eminent domain, all the way to the end and present it to a jury trial, a trial of your peers in the county court where the property is located, present evidence on just compensation, and let the jury figure out, determine what you're entitled to. That's what just compensation means. INDOT has the inherent ability to acquire land via eminent domain as a governmental entity. They don't need to receive it from anyone else. They have it just as a matter of right. It is very difficult to stop an acquisition at the eminent domain phase when they file a lawsuit to get your property. It is very difficult to stop it at that point, especially with road projects. They are de facto public uses. As long as basically INDOT makes an offer to you and follows the law, they're going to be able to take your land. I do want to touch a little bit about stopping the project in general, or changing the project, or trying to get it to reroute around your land, because I'm sure a lot of folks are curious about that. That is something that you would do at this stage of the process. You would contact INDOT, you would contact your state reps, contact your local government officials and say, I don't want this project, I don't want it to happen, I don't want it to go over my land, it shouldn't happen. All of these complaints, issues you might have with this project, the time to lodge those complaints are now. And that is a largely political process. That is, again, contacting your state reps, contacting the people in the government at INDOT saying, I don't want it. try to do what you can now. Voice your concern. Raise your voice as you're entitled to do, and let them know you're not happy about it. We generally don't get involved with that process because it is an eminent domain. It's more just again, it's a political process where you're trying to change something that the government wants to do. But if that is your goal, if that's what you want to do, again, the time to voice your concern is now, in the next year, next couple of years, while they're doing the routing of the project. So you can let them know that you don't like it and you don't want it to happen. So assuming the project is approved, assuming the funding is there, assuming we are down in we are 2027, we're 2028, they're starting to get more serious about the project and they're to the point where they're going to build it, and they need your land. Eventually, they don't just take you to court. It's not a scenario where you wake up one day with a lawsuit and INDOT has sued you for your land. The first stage in the process that I tell folks for the land acquisition process, the eminent domain process, is the appraisal. INDOT will appraise your property. An INDOT appraiser will come out, they'll appraise your property. They may or may not notify you. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And they'll go out, they'll do their appraisal, and they'll go back to INDOT and they'll give their appraisal to INDOT. And then a new person's going to come out, a right-of-way agent, and they're going to issue a uniform offer based on that appraisal. So there'll be two different people. There'll be a right-of-way agent. There'll be an appraiser. There are two different individuals. The appraiser's job is to appraise the property. The right-of-way agent's job is to acquire your land. They'll give you the appraisal, and they'll make you an offer that's based on that appraisal. That is where, when the offer is issued, that's when our firm gets involved. We review offers for free for landowners all the time. We will provide case reviews to those that have an offer, that will receive an offer. Happy to look at it, give you our thoughts for free. Again, you can decide what you want to do. I say negotiations, but I will also note that INDOT notoriously is not great about negotiating with landowners before eminent domain. It's usually a here's the offer, take it or leave it scenario. But regardless, they will give you an offer. They may be able to bump it up nominally, but usually they stick to their appraisal number during these negotiations. So assuming the offer is terrible or it's not what you're entitled to, you can say, no, I don't accept your offer. And INDOT may then decide to file their condemnation petition. That is the eminent domain lawsuit. Condemnation is effectively a synonym for eminent domain. It's not some people think it's, where properties are run down and blighted. And they are condemned. That is a different type of condemnation than this. This is a condemnation is the procedure by which eminent domain is exercised. So they file the lawsuit where your property is located in the county court. They'll serve you with a summons of that condemnation. They'll serve you with the petition. A sheriff or a process server will provide that condemnation petition to you. And then shortly thereafter, the petition is filed. The court will appoint appraisers. They will appoint three, as they're referred to, court-appointed appraisers who come out, and they're supposed to be independent. They come out and they appraise the property. So it's different from the first appraisal. These are appointed by the court to come out and appraise your property. There's three of them. They will create a report. So they will come up with their own determination of what you're entitled to under the law. So let's say INDOT offered you $10,000. The court appoints appraisers. They come out and say your property is worth $30,000. So in that scenario, INDOT would then deposit the $30,000 that the court-appointed appraisers determined your land to be worth. In exchange for that deposit, they get access to the land to begin the road project. This is referred to as quick take, where the state gets the right to the land before the litigation is concluded, before it's over. That is the bargain, so such that it is that they deposit the money, they get access, and then the rest of the case becomes over what you're ultimately entitled to. This court-appointed appraiser report is usually referred to as a preliminary compensation amount, and its sole purpose is to grant INDOT early access to begin construction while the remainder of the litigation is over what you're ultimately entitled to. And ultimately you are entitled to a jury trial, as I mentioned earlier. I will say that most cases do not reach jury trials. You are entitled to a jury trial if you'd like one, but most cases don't get to that point. Most cases usually resolve sometime between the court-appointed appraisal report and the jury trial itself, usually via mediation. So that's kind of a beginning to end, a soup to nuts explanation of the process, eminent domain process in the state of Indiana. So really, what eminent domain, even though you do have the ability to try to stop the eminent domain case, as I mentioned earlier, it's usually very, very difficult and unlikely to succeed. So mostly the eminent domain process is over money and what you're entitled to. What I will say is that these are the best, and because it's all over money, what the best practices are when you get an offer or when you get to the land acquisition phase. These are the best practices we recommend to avoid getting into trouble before you even know what you're doing. This is what we generally tell people to do when you receive your offer from INDOT. First of all, insist that the right-of-way agent communicates via email only. And sends their offer packet via email in addition to regular email. This is important. The right-of-way agents love to have in-person meetings. We generally don't advise that you do that. It's important that if INDOT's going to make a promise, that they make the promise in writing and there's a record of it. It doesn't do you any good for them to tell you they're going to do a bunch of stuff verbally if they're not willing to put pen to paper and put it on the record. What we tell people as soon as you get the offer, to tell them via email or text that, thank you, I will review this and get back to you in a week. This allows you some time to get a review of the offer in the interim while not totally putting them off. Right-of-way agents are notorious for hounding landowners. They like to be around when they make their offer, and they'll make an offer, they'll follow up, they'll stop by in person. This will avoid that, and it'll basically keep everything at arm's length until you want to engage, and it'll give you time to do due diligence once you receive that offer. Once you receive the offer, we strongly recommend contacting an attorney for a review of that offer. We do those offer reviews for free, as I mentioned earlier. I'm happy to do it for you as well. Again, avoid in-person discussions, avoid negotiations. It's at least without first talking to a landowner or with an attorney, rather. Again, that might seem counterintuitive, but ultimately, you're not. Once you receive that offer, you might not know what you're entitled to. You might get an offer and blurt something out and say, "Well, I think I should get X." You might be short selling yourself. You might be going too low, or you might not necessarily know what you're entitled to and how this property or how this acquisition is going to fully affect your property and what you're entitled to under the law. So we generally avoid in-person discussions and negotiations with INDOT. What not to do when you receive your offer? Do not. I just mentioned this. Don't jump into negotiations or discuss value or the property in general before contacting an attorney. Ultimately, again, this goes back to my first point. You don't really know what you're entitled to yet, so it isn't beneficial to jump in and start saying things about what you're entitled to. Also important to note, if you jump in and say, well, they offer $10,000 and you say, well, I should get 50, and you contact me and I say, well, actually, you should be getting 100. Problem is you already told them 50. And that 50 is going to stick with you from the beginning of the process all the way to the end, because they write all this information down. They write down all the discussions they have with landowners. They'll document it, and that'll stick with your file the rest of the acquisition. So it's important to not just jump in and start talking about money. Don't jump out and get an appraisal either. You might eventually need an appraisal. Don't get me wrong. They have their appraisal. You might need one yourself. But it's important that if you're getting an appraisal, A, that it's necessary and that you should be getting it, and B, that what you're getting is worth the money you're spending. This isn't buying an appraisal like one for a mortgage. This is a very unique type of appraisal that needs to be done by somebody who's qualified to do an eminent domain appraisal, that can testify in court, and that knows what they're doing. Because it is an investment, and it's an important one, and it's one that you shouldn't just do and contact your local guy down the street and say, hey, can you do this for me? Again, I generally don't advise meeting in person with right-of-way agents. I don't advise making rushed decisions. Rushed decisions are usually usually benefit NDOT. They usually benefit the government. So don't jump into a negotiating. Don't jump into a yes or no scenario. They want you to make a rush decision. They want you to sign on the dotted line as soon as possible. And once you do, that's it. So just you have some time. You have the ability to say no to NDOT. You don't have to accept their offer. You have the ability to challenge that, and you should exercise that. But at the same vein, do not ignore the scenario altogether when it comes in and when you get the offer. We have folks that ignore it. They out of sight, out of mind, and then all of a sudden they end up in court and they don't even know what they're doing, and maybe they shouldn't be at court. Not advised to do that and just let it sit and linger and not address it. Want to talk about 3 cases to your case for just compensation. These apply generally for across the board. And this is where the disagreement exists for just compensation and why our firms like us exist, because there's a lot of different ways to appraise property, and there's a lot of different I guess, theories of value that can be employed. And a lot of times NDOT will come in and undervalue property. They will issue bad offers based on bad appraising. So these are some things to look for when we get to that point. The value of the acquisition obviously is very important. What's the price per acre that they're offering you? What's the highest and best use of the land? Is your property maybe commercial, even though it's being used agriculturally? You can employ highest and best use, where you can argue that your property should actually be valued commercially, because if it were to sell on the open market, it would sell as commercial land, even though it might not be used commercially in the interim. That's something that can change appraising. Experts, of course, are very important. I touched on this earlier. Appraising, very important that you get the right experts that can support your position of value. Remainder damage, and this is only for partial takings. Partial takings, as you might imagine, are when NDOT only takes a portion of your land and they leave a remnant. And the question is, how does that partial acquisition affect the entirety of the land? There are a number of ways that partial takings can affect the remainder property. Big issue for residential properties: setback laws. Is your house closer to the road? How much closer is it to the road? And how much loss of setback has that impacted the structure of the house? Generally, people don't like to live near highways. And what happens is that the closer the house is to the road, the higher the impact that acquisition has on the value of the property, value of the home. Ordinance non-compliance. So they put you out of compliance with local ordinances. That can be an issue as well. Usually there's setback requirements, county, city, you name it, that houses need to be a certain distance from roadways, and roads will come close to houses and put you out of compliance. That's an issue. For commercial or agricultural property, you're looking at, again, ordinance non-compliance. If you lose access, that's a huge issue. Impacts to visibility, reduced parking, reduced size, all of these things, changes in highest and best use. If you have an agricultural property that gets bisected, and then you have property that was formerly a whole property, it's now been cut in half. How does that impact the value of the property? Usually significantly. Farmers don't want to deal with that type of thing. It affects farming, it affects farmability. That is something that can affect the entirety of the parcel. These all come into play, and there's any number of other ways that remainder damage can exist. A lot of times NDOT is not great about offering that to landowners, so something to keep in mind. And then finally, relocation. And this is if it's total taking, where they're taking a business or a house. You are also entitled to relocation expenses, such that you have to move the house, you have to move your residence somewhere else, you have to move your business somewhere else. You are entitled to compensation over and above the other components to relocate your business or your house. As you might imagine, NDOT sometimes doesn't do a great job of offering a proper relocation as well. So hiring attorneys, So the way our firm works, we operate, and this comes into play when you receive your offer. We operate on a contingency fee basis. We get paid contingent on how much more we get than what is offered by NDOT. In an easy example is if you get a $10,000 offer, you hire our firm, and we get you $100,000. Our firm would collect a third, 33% of the 90,000 that we add to the case, and that comes out at the end. So, for example, if you wanted to hire our firm, it'd be as simple as signing a contract. There's no money exchanged. Sign the contract, and we get to work, and then our fee comes out at the end. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. A lot of folks like this because we're on the same page. We become basically partners at that point where we're all invested in the same thing, and that's getting the most money as possible for the landowner, because we stand to benefit as well, depending on how well we do. So that's our standard contingency fee agreement. If you're interested in hourly or a billable rate or a retainer agreement, we also do that. Generally, folks don't want to do that, but if that's something you're interested in, we can certainly talk about it. And then finally, and this will be my second to last slide, and we'll open up for questions. These are real life examples of road project successes we've had in the past. These are not guarantees of success. I'm not guarantee that if you're offered $15,000, we're going to get you $3 million. But I do want to demonstrate that we pride ourselves on our knowledge of the law and handling these cases, but ultimately we are judged by how well we do for landowners and how much more we can get for them than what's offered. And these are just some examples of how we've done for some landowners on road projects. And it's also demonstrative, I think, of how bad these offers can sometimes be from NDOT and from other government agencies. They come in and they appraise it, and you think, well, if they're appraising it, they should be probably doing a pretty good job. They're doing something. The reality is that they can be really bad, and they can really undershoot what you're entitled to and really not capture the full compensation you're entitled to. So just keep that in mind. I generally advise people to have some level of skepticism when NDOT comes in and makes offers. You would stand to benefit by being a little skeptical coming in as opposed to the opposite. So yes, that's what I recommend. And then finally, this is my last slide. Some general pieces of advice, then we'll open up for questions. If you have questions, you can go ahead and start asking them now so I can address them once we get done here. Moving forward, there isn't really a lot to do now because we are so far away from the project, several years away from offers. If you're trying to stop or change the project, again, now is the time to do that. Talk to your state reps, talk to NDOT, voice your concerns. But when we do get down and offers start getting made, these pieces of advice are more relevant. Once you get that offer, that's when you hire an attorney. That's when you seek somebody out, start getting some professional help, because then your case becomes real, and that's when you need to definitely address it. When you get that offer, again, don't rush into a decision. Again, that's likely to benefit NDOT rather. If you have a bunch of landowners that are all neighbors, that are all together, if you can form a group and go under the same representation, that can be beneficial to you as well. Especially if you come to me and say, hey, me and my 5 folks want to go with Seaver Walker Paget, I can potentially lower our fee so that you get a better deal. And it makes it, because it's more, I can work more efficiently and allows me to lower my fee. Finally, and that's my number and that's my email address. You have one chance at compensation. Once you sign the paperwork, that's it. It's over. It's done. It's imperative then that when you sign that paperwork, you know what you're getting is correct, and you're getting the best deal you can possibly get, because once you sign it, it's over. It's done, and they have it. So. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end the slide presentation, and I will open it up to questions if you guys have any. And if you do have questions, you can either put it in the Q&A or the chat over to the right. Okay. I am not seeing any questions as we sit here right now, which is not a big deal. Oh, Nick, we got a question. You are very welcome. Thanks for stopping by to our webinar. I appreciate it. Yeah, it doesn't look like there are any questions, which is understandable. I get it. If you have questions down the road, if you have questions that you maybe didn't remember, that's not a problem. Just shoot me an email. Again, here's my information again, Jordan at swp-legal.com. I'm not going to bill you for these types of questions. Happy to answer any questions you might have. If you think of it later, just let me know. Other than that, thank you for stopping by. I appreciate it. And have a good one.